When we no longer have any use for an old building, we usually sell it to somebody else or knock it down and replace it with something new. That's the way progress works, and that's how so many historic old buildings and towns have been lost. It isn't the process that's followed every time, though. Sometimes, after the people who used to be there have gone, buildings and locations simply become abandoned. That leaves it to us to tell their stories in videos like this. The abandoned town of Gudim, hidden away in Chukotka, Russia, is a former Soviet military site and missile base that probably got its name from Colonel Gudim, who oversaw its construction. Back when it was active and populated, it was better known by the codename Anadir 1. The base was built during 1958 and became active during 1961, immediately representing a threat to the United States of America during the height of the Cold War. This was one of the closest Russian bases to American territory and was used to store nuclear warheads. It's been said, but never proven, that the missiles positioned at the site were permanently aimed at Alaska, South Dakota, and Washington state. Had the order ever come for combat to begin, Gudim would have unleashed havoc on the U.S. mainland. Thankfully, it never did, and Anadir 1 is now a ghost town. The last of the nuclear weapons were removed in 1986, and the facility itself was finally abandoned by the Russian military in 2002. It's thought that 15 or more secret military ghost towns like this exist across Russian territory, although none are likely to be quite as eerie or threatening as Gudim. Many years ago, millionaire property developer Mohammed Hadid started building what was supposed to be a dream mansion in Bel Air, Los Angeles, USA. As someone with plenty of money and experience in the field, it should have been a relatively easy job. Instead, it became an eyesore and attracted the attention of the FBI. Hadid bought land to build the mansion upon in 2011, but appears to have undertaken a lot of work that wasn't covered by the original permit. The half-built mansion looks almost nothing like the original artist's impression and is almost twice the size it's supposed to be. The FBI became involved when allegations were made that Hadid paid city building inspectors to look the other way and let him do what he wanted. But if he did ever make such an attempt, he failed. The city of Los Angeles ordered him to halt construction work in 2015 and then prosecuted him for illegal construction work. He admitted to the charges in court and was ordered to either amend the structure or tear it down. 5 years later, it's still standing, half complete, destined never to become the palatial dwelling it was supposed to be. While we're in Los Angeles, let's head underground and check out its secret tunnels. Almost nobody knows they're there. The true origin of the tunnels is disputed, but they became infamous during the Prohibition era, when the purchase and consumption of alcohol were illegal in the United States of America. As you'll no doubt be aware, the ban wasn't effective and parties continued in LA. These tunnels, which run on for 11 miles, became connections and service facilities between speakeasies, all of which operated with seemingly benign shop fronts at street level. You might wonder why the city's authorities didn't spot such a glaringly obvious deception, but that might have something to do with the fact that the mayor's office was allegedly in on the fact, taking a cut of the profits. The tunnels date back to a time before the Prohibition era, though. In fact, they were once used as equestrian tunnels in the days before cars were a common sight on the roads of Los Angeles. There are also tales of the police using them to transport dangerous criminals, and banks using them in more recent times to move large sums of cash around undetected. If these walls could talk, they'd have a lot of LA's secrets to tell. We're heading back to Soviet territory now, and another abandoned military facility. One so dangerous that it was built on Vosrozhdeniya Island in the Aral Sea. Prior to the commencement of the Cold War, this was an unremarkable island hosting nothing more than a small fish processing plant. By 1948, it was armed to the teeth. Because the Soviets were so secretive, nobody knows much about what went on here, other than the fact it was used to test new weaponry. The tiny village of Kantubek was transformed into a permanent military base under the codename Aralsk 7, featuring laboratories and hangars. Locals say that the people who worked here were scientists rather than soldiers, which probably offers a clue about the nature of the weapons that were developed and tested in those labs. Thankfully, whatever those scientists came up with was never called upon in battle. Kentubek is silent now, with all of the facilities abandoned and anything dangerous long since destroyed or taken away. The island now belongs to Uzbekistan, but it's never been repopulated because of fears about possible contamination. The city of Nottingham in England is perhaps best known to the rest of the world for its connection to the legend of Robin Hood, but perhaps it should get more attention for its incredible network of caves. These stunning caverns, carved directly into the natural sandstone that occurs in the area, have been used for a variety of purposes over the centuries, including tanneries, air raid shelters, and even cellars for public houses. What makes them appear so unusual today is that the street that used to run above them has been demolished, leaving only the caves standing as a monument to what once existed there. Ceramics discovered deep within the caves proved that they were in use as long ago as the 13th century, and at one point, perhaps even as recently as 1845. They were used as homes by the city's poorest residents. Over 800 caves have been fully explored and documented thus far, although local historians believe that there might be up to 200 more waiting to be found. The caves narrowly avoided being demolished to make way for the Broadmarsh Shopping Center during the 1960s, but a protest by local residents led to them being recognized as an ancient monument and preserved for future generations. We've already seen one abandoned mansion in the United States of America. Now here's another one in Northern Ontario, Canada, and it's even bigger than the one in Bel Air. If it had been completed, it would have included a full-sized golf course, art gallery, squash court, swimming pool, waterfall, boathouse, and an enormous hot tub. The mansion was to become the home of the owner of a Canadian foresting company, who paid for construction work to begin in 2005. Unfortunately for him, he was hit hard by an economic downturn in 2007, forcing him to cut back on expenditure and call a halt to the project. 13 years later, it looks unlikely that he's ever going to come back and finish the job. Having spent $25 million so far, it's estimated that he'd need to spend at least another $1 million to repair the damage caused by the long period of abandonment and get it into habitable condition. As that hasn't happened, it suggests that he either no longer has the money or he's no longer interested in building the house. Let's head back underground now and check out the Great Siege Tunnels of Gibraltar, so called because they were carved out of limestone by the British military during an attempt by the combined forces of the Spanish and French to seize the island from Britain toward the end of the 18th century. The tunnels played an instrumental role in ensuring that the attack failed, and the island remained in British hands. By building and fortifying the tunnels, the British trapped their enemies on wide open marsh ground, making them easy targets. Large teams of men using crowbars, sledgehammers, and gunpowder explosions carved the tunnels between 1782 and 1783, turning the tide of the 4-year-long siege decisively. They largely became abandoned after the siege ended, although they were called back into service during the Second World War and became a temporary home for up to 16,000 troops. Having so many people in the tunnels at the same time damaged them badly, and they're now unsafe to access. The few parts that are still safe to enter have become part of Gibraltar's Upper Rock Nature Reserve. We don't know what it is about rich people spending huge amounts of money on building mansions and then giving up before the job is done, but it obviously happens a lot more often than most of us realize. Here's yet another failed mansion building project in New South Wales, Australia. This sprawling palace covers an area of 53,000 square feet and appears to have been almost finished when the order came to down tools. According to locals, work began in 2006 and stopped in 2009 for reasons unknown. The site's millionaire owner hasn't been seen in the area since the workers went home. The site wasn't abandoned in the truest sense of the word, though. With no security on site to protect it, it became an unorthodox indoor skate park, popular with teenagers and thrill seekers. As one might imagine, the presence of so many teenagers led to a lot of graffiti tagging and vandalism, so the mansion no longer looks its ornate best. It appears that someone else has acquired it recently, as the security fences are back up. So perhaps, one day, it will be finished after all. Our next abandoned location is an impressive-looking piece of technology in Armenia, and it's known by several names. The most common of them is the Haruni Mirror Radio Telescope, but it also goes by the Orgov Radio Optical Telescope, or simply ROT-54. The highly sophisticated and sensitive telescope is positioned high in the Armenian mountains, on Mount Aragats. The dish is colossal. Its diameter is 177 feet. Had it worked as well as it was intended to at the design stage, it would have been capable of making observations down to 300 gigahertz. Unfortunately, it's never operated at full capacity. Work began on ROT-54 in 1975, continuing until 1985, with the facility going partially live the following year. Miraculously, it survived the Armenian earthquake of 1988, but was still working its way up to full capacity when it was decided that it would be repurposed for astronomical use in 1990. From there, it developed fault after fault, with the most recent attempt to get it working properly failing in 2012 because the control arm of the secondary mirror became defective. Plans to fix it were still being discussed as recently as 2018, so maybe someone will get around to it eventually. When the Batman nightclub opened in Pattaya, Thailand, more than 20 years ago, the city was so proud of it that they renamed the street it was built on Soy Batman. We'd be willing to bet that they're not quite so proud of it today. The massive club, modeled after Batman's famous lair, the Batcave, was intended to become one of the most popular and attractive nightclubs not only in Thailand, but in this region of the world. Instead, it's become a concrete eyesore, standing derelict for 2 decades and covered in graffiti and filth. During the early 1990s, the club would announce its opening every night by projecting the bat signal high into the sky. But the good times lasted only 2 years. The enormous premises was simply too expensive to run, and when an electrical fire broke out one night, it was decided that the costs of the necessary repairs couldn't be justified, and so the business closed its doors. The structure has now decayed so badly that the former dance floor is submerged under 2 feet of water. The only clue to its past identity is the Batman logo that's still attached to the exterior walls. It's very hard to look at Matsuo Mine in Hachimantai, Japan today and imagine it as a place of almost unparalleled luxury. It must have been, though. Why else would it have been nicknamed the Paradise Above the Clouds? The existence of the mine is something of a historical anomaly. Normally, when a large corporation builds homes for workers close to a facility they operate, the homes are of poor quality. The company that operated the Matsuo sulfur mines decided they wanted to treat their employees differently. They provided beautiful homes with central heating, along with hygienic garbage chutes and indoor toilets. That doesn't sound like much now, but in the early 20th century, such facilities were generally reserved for the rich. Life was good here until the 1960s, when the mining business began to struggle. It eventually failed in 1969, forcing the people who once lived here to relocate in search of work. For reasons best known to themselves, they left many of their personal items and belongings in their homes when they left, many of which can still be found strewn around this strange, misty place today. It's often said that God works in mysterious ways. If that's true, God was working in especially mysterious ways in 1993, when Minister Horace Burgess of Crossville, Tennessee, USA, claims to have heard the voice of the Lord telling him to build the world's largest treehouse. Minister Horace wasn't inclined to argue with his maker, so he set about the task immediately. For a man with no prior construction experience, what he built is truly impressive. His 97-foot-tall wooden construction stands on an enormous white oak tree with a thick base, propped up by a further 6 oaks to keep it standing. He continued to expand and add to the treehouse for 14 years and claims that he's only spent around $10,000 on it because the Lord supplied him with the rest of his building materials. During that time, he's added 5 stories, 80 rooms, a chapel, and even a bell tower. For most of its existence, it was open to visitors, but the Tennessee Fire Marshal ordered it closed in 2016 after deeming it a fire hazard. It turns out that they had a point. The treehouse was badly damaged by a fire in late 2019 and is yet to be repaired. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.